Welcome to this class. I'm going to get the opportunity to introduce our speaker for this hour. I met Daniel a few years ago after I began working here with the Sunset International Bible Institute. And I'm not going to spend the time talking about his academic accomplishments, but I can tell you he has done a great deal in the field of academics and completed his doctoral studies this past year and has completed all of that and is now working both in teaching in the master's program, the doctoral program here in the graduate studies at Sunset. But what I will tell you about Daniel that I love the most is he is first and foremost a man of God, that he is a father, he is a husband, and he ministers with the church in Surprise, Arizona, a congregation that's doing some great things. And the more I get to know and love Daniel, the more I appreciate his desire to learn and to serve and to be who God wants him to be. And so I'm very thankful to introduce him. I am especially passionate about this particular subject and looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I never thought about it from the standpoint of not by osmosis, but certainly the idea of how are we transferring faith from one generation to the next, and how do we do that faithfully. And so with that, I'm going to turn the class over to Daniel and let him bring his lesson to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. I'll pay you later. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here with you. Thank you. Yeah, you know what? If you turn it on, it works better. All right. Matthew 28, a text all of us are familiar with. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. A text that not only conveys the commission that we are to create disciples, but also a text that expounds upon how to create disciples. And so I'm curious, because I do want this to be a multi-way conversation. This is not me trying to impart all kinds of wisdom, but us trying to work through some stuff together. And I'm curious, as you look at this text, what two components of discipleship making do you encounter?
Teaching.
Okay, teaching.
You have to go.
Okay, you have to go.
Serving.
Okay, serving. What else? We get to play guess what I'm thinking because I'm looking for one.
Baptizing.
Okay, baptizing. So there's really two. And everything else you guys talked about also falls into those ideas. There is conversion, the baptism process. There's also teaching, and both are needed to make disciples. The teaching, that is, to fully disciple someone. That not only do we convert them, but after we convert them, we continue to try and teach them, thereby trying to grow disciples. Not merely make converts, but to grow disciples. I want you to think with me for a minute about that conversion idea. If you were about to try and study with somebody, if you were trying to convert them, what would you do? I'm curious. What would you do? If you're trying to convert somebody, what would you do?
I ask questions.
Okay, we might ask questions to help get them to think. What else might you do?
I think you have to establish a connection with them, so instead of coming with the message, it's understanding what level are they in and going from that.
Okay, making some connections so you kind of know how to meet them where they are.
Right.
All right.
You might ask, tell me about your faith.
Okay, what experiences do they already have? What encounters do they already have? So that might be important to know. Anything else?
Do you believe in God?
Okay.
His authority from the Bible?
An important question to where do we begin? Can we begin with the Bible, or do we actually have to begin with before the Bible? Yes, we use the Bible, but if you don't believe the Bible is authoritative, like many in the world, why would we begin there? We have to begin with it. There is a God, right?
I think also the cultural background, coming from another culture, I don't want people just to bring me the message. I want to see who you are first.
Okay.
So before I can even hear you, I'm going to screen you. Who are you?
Okay.
That is bringing me this, and then I'm going to be able to receive what you're saying. So that's what I say, establishing those connections. If you're
Okay.
not a non-Christian person.
So we need to know who the other person is. We need to build connections. We need to try and understand how we can meet them where they are. Let me ask you this, change the question up a little bit. If you were trying to convert somebody, where in the Bible would you start?
Wherever.
Wherever? Doesn't matter wherever. Just pick something.
Philip with the Ethiopian eunuch.
Okay.
He started where he was, where the Ethiopian eunuch was.
Okay.
You start where they're at and work from that.
Okay.
If they don't know anything about the New Testament, they're well versed in the Old Testament, you start in the Old Testament.
Okay.
If they don't know anything about the Old Testament, but they're faith is familiar with something in the New Testament, start there.
Okay, so based on our connection, we try and figure out where to start, but meet them where they are. Be willing to start wherever, but try and meet them where they are.
Yeah. Another thing, I work with a lot of teachers that come from Europe. Every year I've done this for 23 years, and they have no idea about God. But the one thing that I always get them through those years is community service. And the first thing they say, why do you do this? And that's my opening door.
Okay.
And this is why I do it.
Okay. So through showing the love, we're able to then tell about love. Okay.
Yes.
I want to switch gears so we don't spend all of our time in the introduction. How does this text apply to children? Children have to be converted. I realize that makes sense, but I remember the first time I had encountered this argument, and I went, I hadn't thought of it that way. That children, especially those already in the church, have to be converted. This is a picture of osmosis. No, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the mechanics of osmosis. Some of you in here might be scientists. You know more than I do anyways. But what I want you to see, if I can get my little, nope, that doesn't show up, is that osmosis is the process of water or a solvent shifting across a semi-permeable membrane so that that which is of a greater concentration will shift so that both concentrations are equal. My point in showing you this is it just kind of naturally moves across. That in osmosis, in this case water, will naturally shift from one section to another section, from one part to another part, all on its own, just by being there. And sometimes that's kind of how we try and do faith transfer with generations. That if we can just get them in the same room with good people, if we can just get them in the same place with good individuals, that will just kind of naturally happen. That if they're just around other Christians, in the presence of other Christians, that faith will naturally shift from one person to another. And I'm not suggesting that being around other Christians is bad, in no way. What I am suggesting is that that's probably not the entire thing. That's probably not the entire idea of what it means to transfer faith from one generation to the next. That's not what Matthew said. It said, go and make disciples, which first begins with conversion. And conversion doesn't necessarily happen just because I'm in the same room with a bunch of Christians. It doesn't just naturally take place. But instead, it's the intentional conversion of individuals. I think we still have a couple chairs here. There's a couple over there. There's one or two up here if you want. But instead, it is the natural, or not just the natural, it is the intentional conversion of individuals. Intentional presentation of the message of Christ. Hopefully, ideally, in a language that they can understand. For if we were to go to another country to try and do mission work, the first thing we need to know is how is it that they speak, because we don't simply want to convey the message of God. We want to convey it in a way that they can understand, and we would not go to another country and just simply and only live out Christianity. We would also need to convey the message of Christ, or else we would not be making converts. As you suggested, that it allows for a door to open in the way that we live, but if we don't step through that door and then say something, we miss out on the opportunity. So what I want us to talk about today is how can we intentionally try and engage and ideally convert other generations, recognizing that just simply being in one another's presence isn't enough. Not to say that we don't need it, yes we do, but it isn't all that there is. I'd like to ask you this question. Who is responsible for helping young people come to faith? Who is responsible for helping faith go from one generation to the next?
We are.
What do you think? Say,
We are.
okay, we are?
Start with the parents.
Okay, that all people are responsible? We might look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. And shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, who is the you in this text? Are you sure? Parents do have the first responsibility. So you does refer to parents, but not only parents. For if you back up in Deuteronomy chapter 5, beginning in verse 1, you'll see that this is a larger part of a larger sermon that Moses is going to present to all of Israel. So the you is all of Israel, but it absolutely has to begin with parents because parents are going to have the most interaction with their children. But it isn't limited to only parents. In their book, Family Discipleship, the author will talk about that oftentimes faith transfer comes most impactfully in the regular rhythm of life. And as you look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, notice how the regular rhythm of life is described. When you get up, lie down. When you get up at breakfast, or bedtime. When you walk along the way, when you lie down and when you rise, that regular rhythm of life that as we bathe it in the idea of Christianity, as we bathe it in the attempt to try and convey Christian principles, it is that regular rhythm that helps to grow disciples, and all of God's people are accomplished in trying to bring about that regular rhythm. Yes, of course, it begins with parents. Why? Because fathers are to diligently teach their children. Parents are to raise up their children in the knowledge and admonition of the Lord. The most recent research I've come across suggests that parents already know this. We try and spend a lot of our time expressing that parents, is your primary responsibility, but according to the research I've come across most recently, parents already are aware of this reality. The challenge they have is how do they take this piece of information and teach it in addition to everything else that they feel that they have to teach as well. From a congregation's perspective, we also bear a responsibility to help bring about faith transfer from one generation to the next. I want us to spend just a couple minutes, and I'd like to kind of break up into 4 groups as best we can. So we're going to kind of do just like this, and we'll do group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. If you don't know which group you're in, just kind of figure it out. I don't know which group you're in either. So just kind of turn to your neighbor, and what I'd like to know is, in your mind, what is the greatest threat that we currently face to faith transfer across generations? In your mind, what is the greatest threat that the church faces in trying to bring about faith transfer? I'm going to give you like 2-3 minutes to do that. Just kind of the first thing that pops in your head. Go ahead. There's 3 seats up here if anybody wants.
What you don't have, well, I was thinking about tonight, but what you don't have, so lawyers get to fill up
All right. It's always dangerous whenever people open the groups, because sometimes I can't get them back. But I promise I have a mic, I can yell loud with you. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to know, what did your group, what did you hear? Just very quickly, a couple of things that you heard. Well, what did somebody hear in terms of the greatest challenge we face in faith transfer? Okay, social media.
I think the deconstruct of family as we know it, because that's trickling down, and I'm an educator, so I see that coming from colleges now, like your mom is not your mom, so this is just the birth person, the birth parent, and it's there. Like I have a son that went through all that, so on my personal experience, I think the greatest step is shifting the vision of who we are as a family, because then it changes the perception of the next generation, and it's already there.
Definition of family, what family means. I'm of the opinion that Gen Z is, with Gen Z's in college now, I realize that. But Gen Z is the most fearful and loneliest generation of all time. And I've talked about that before and said because of all the challenges that they have faced.
That's what she said. There's no hope anymore. Those kids don't have hope.
And why isn't there hope, I wonder? Some of it is the challenges that they have experienced. If you think about, I put Gen Z, anybody who either doesn't remember or was not born for 9/11. Reason being is you usually try and mark generations by about 20 years, but there are certain markers that seem to shift things. And if you remember, the world changed at 9/11. But if you don't remember 9/11 or you weren't born then, you don't know what it looked like pre-9/11. So you don't know that the world changed. But if you think about all the challenges that have existed post 9/11, there's been quite a few of them. We might look at things like Drain the Swamp. I'm not making any political statements. I am simply saying that there were some challenges with political upheaval. School shootings, most of the young people I talk to now just assume that there's going to be a school shooting at some point, and they need to train for it and be prepared for it. They're not surprised by it anymore. We can look, of course, at 9/11, we can look at the war on terror, and on we can continue to list things. Well, I've mentioned this before in other groups, but somebody inevitably raised their hand. Well, hold on. There were other generations that faced difficulties. There was World War I, there was World War II, all the wars we faced. So what makes this different? And that's the difference.
The construction of reality. Reality is your own opinion. Like, you can have your truth, I can have mine. So there is not an absolute truth anymore. And that's a little scary.
The postmodernism does impact it, but it's the family predominantly. Because since the family dynamic has changed, it's eroded some of the challenges. But you're right that we now have to adapt in terms of what does it mean to be family? How do we interact with family, and how are we as family?
Well, it's also a big change in my life. When I was growing up, the whole neighborhood was looking at what all the kids did. And Mr. Brown was sitting on his front porch drinking a big bottle of beer every night. You better not let him see you do something bad, because he would discipline you himself and then tell your parents. Nobody wants to be involved, and in fact, we don't want it.
So we got the challenge of what is family in terms of what is community. Somebody else, what is something that impacts faith transfer? Yeah.
A lack of a good role model to see faith not just in the mind but actually lived out
Okay.
will stamp out any desire.
Okay. We have role model challenges. Hold on, I want to hear somebody else first.
Could possibly be, in this day and age, lack of verbal intimacy. There's a lot of texting going on in the world these days, you know?
Okay, a lot of it in terms of how we interact, the interaction becomes a little bit more challenging. Yeah.
Time.
Okay, time.
Like we're overcommitted with our time, so the things you have the less time to do,
Okay.
the less you're going to do those things.
Okay. So time becomes a challenge.
Congregational passivity.
Okay, passivity. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
We were talking about how there's this cultural gap between the two generations. Even if you grew up in the same town, what I've seen is older generations blaming younger generations for the problems of the whole world, and so they don't trust younger generations with something as important as the gospel.
Okay, we have the age gap and how we navigate that age gap.
I was going to say, to answer your question, I'm just going to double down on what was said over here, is time.
Okay.
We don't spend near as much time as we used to spend with our children.
Okay, time specifically in this case with those who are trying to convert.
Right.
So time across the board, but time in terms of one generation to the next.
You're talking about the greatest threat, and all these things can be used, yes, to a threat, but the greatest of these seems to be a center of self-centeredness.
Okay.
Selfishness, a lack of love, or apathy for one person, one generation, one culture, or ethnicity to the other. A lack of love for your family, a lack of love for another person's family seems to be the greatest threat.
Okay, a lack of love for those who are around us. You know, maybe one more. All right, go ahead.
I think being courageous to have the hard conversation, because they're gonna come with gay, non-binary, and all these things, and sometimes as a church, we don't wanna approach those conversations, and I think that's along with the younger generation, because they're part of their identity crisis, so we have to be on the forefront of that.
So how do we have very difficult and often uncomfortable conversations? I'm going to give you a couple of mine. I did not limit it to one because I got to cheat. The first in my mind is retirement mindset. You have encountered it any time you've gone to recruit teachers. You've probably gotten this response at some point in time, that I've already done my time. Henry Ford, when he brought about the Industrial Revolution by creating the assembly line, the way he lured people into what was a very difficult and hard and demanding job was saying, if you will just put in your time, if you just put in your 20 years, you can be done. You won't have to work any more of the day of your life. It was a very alluring idea, right? Because I don't have to work the rest of the time. And how else are you going to get somebody to exert the amount of effort and energy required to work on an assembly line when most of it was manual manpower and muscle labor? Because you didn't have machines. So how are you going to do that? You could only bring them in by offering them something really great. And there's nothing inherently wrong with retirement. Don't hear me say that there's anything wrong with retirement. However, that idea of I can put in my time and then be done somehow has filtered its way into the church, where we've arrived at the conclusion that I can put in my time and then be done. And the result is problematic for both younger generations and older generations. For those who are older can arrive at the conclusion, well, I guess it's time for me to be put out to pasture. I have nothing else to offer. I already did my time. They lose out on the opportunity to see that glimmer of excitement in a young person's eyes when they first learn something. And I see that glimmer anytime that my younger children interact with some of the older members. I can see that glimmer of, oh, I remember when it was. And that glimmer is important because it keeps you where you can, I don't know, feel young. I'm not old enough to know yet. But it seems to at least encourage a continued movement forward. For those who are younger, they miss out on the opportunity to learn of not only what are the truths of the Bible, but how do we live out the truths of the Bible. Because you who are older have learned, how do we hold on to our faith in difficult times? When Satan comes calling, when life becomes hard and difficult, how do we hold on to our faith when it's really hard to do? How do we practically hold on to it? You've learned how to do that. And so younger generation lose out on it. And this becomes problematic in terms of faith transfer because if the older generation isn't there to transfer the faith, how does faith transfer happen? Youth minister mainly models. You'll notice I did not say youth minister only models because I'm not sure there is such a thing, but youth minister mainly models. You might have heard of the one-eared Mickey Mouse model. Those of you who've done the youth minister training likely have. If you picture Mickey Mouse with just a single ear, it's the way we sometimes do youth ministry. That with the youth ministry is off on its own. Yeah, you're not going to get that image out of your head. Youth ministry might be off on its own realm. Say again? You took it there. Youth ministry might be off on its own idea, in its own realm. Solution-focused ministry out by Saddleback kind of emphasizes a particular idea that we're going to take young people and we're going to put them in their own building, in their own stuff, with their own van. It's kind of the height of Christianity. Don't mishear me, I'm not saying it is. But from a young person's perspective, how exciting is it to have your own van with your own youth minister, with your own budget, your own trips, your own stuff? Man, that's exciting. No wonder whenever they graduate, and I'm like, where did it all go? Now, don't mishear me. I'm not saying youth ministry is bad. Youth ministry is very good. However, when the young people aren't present with those who are older, how can faith transfer happen? Furthermore, it's kind of evolved, and that not only do we have a one-eared Mickey Mouse model, if we're really honest, we have an 8-legged octopus model. And that every group, every generation has their own class, their own group, their own budget. We all go do our own things. And don't mishear me, going to do our own things by age group, by life experience is not bad. We need to be able to talk about things that are currently affecting our life stage. But if that's the only time we're interacting, how can faith be transferred? There has to be interaction outside of only worship. Because worship, we worship together, and that is great and wonderful, and we should continue to do that. But how do you build a relationship with someone? How do you talk through how we live out our faith, what it looks like to move through faith and we're in the worship assembly? It's hard to build relationships in that arena. If that's the only time we're together. So it becomes a challenge of how can we transfer faith across generations if generations are not spending time with one another. Religion as a resource mindset. In his book, The End of Youth Ministry, Andrew Root, who is a youth ministry researcher, will talk about there's been a shift in how parents view religion. It's now viewed as a resource by which parents can help their kids find their thing. Their thing might be football. It might be a career. It might be, you could list anything and everything you could possibly do, and that the pinnacle reason for being a parent is to help your child find their thing. And if religion helps you to do that, fantastic. But it's merely or is often viewed as merely a resource by which to help children grow, as opposed to a faith lifestyle that is to be conveyed. It becomes very challenging to transfer faith if faith is viewed merely as one of many resources that might be needed. Cultural differences. You mentioned the age gap. The age gap has always been there. It's always been there. Older generations have always looked at younger generations and said, oh my goodness, they're ruining the world. And younger generations have always looked at older generations and said, oh my goodness, they're so out of touch. It's just the way it's always been, right? But it's my opinion that the age gap widened right around the time of the internet. And here's why. Can you picture a world without the printing press? Of course you can. Now, inevitably, whenever I ask this question, somebody says, well, sure I can. No, you can't. You've never seen it. You can imagine it, but you can't picture it, because we have no idea how that would impact our world. The printing press is so pervasive within our world and our society, we have no idea what the world would look like without it. The internet's done the same thing. that the internet has become so pervasive, especially for those who are younger. They have never seen a world without it. They've never seen a world without social media. So I find it interesting whenever I talk with young people, if you ask them to leave their phone somewhere, and they actually do it, some of you have experienced it at camp, where you tell your young people, okay, we're not going to do anything with our phones, we're going to put them away, and they're like, oh my goodness, it was so free, it was so wonderful. But if you ask them to do that when they get home, they're going to say, I can't do that. How would I talk with my friends? How would I survive? Because they have no idea what a world without it looks like. And so as a result of this age gap, it seems that both generations just kind of come to fear one another. Worldview is not only the lens by which we view the world, it is also the lens by which we view what the world could become. And so for those in generations, a different generation across the age gap, those who are older are afraid that those who are younger are going to mess up the world that is. The world that's been created. Those who are younger are afraid that the older generation is going to keep the world from what it could become. And both generations end up terrified of one another, and in some ways not understanding one another, and it's not good. Because, yeah, I realize that the wrapping changes, but the candy-coated center of what it means to be a human, the connection that we need, what it means to follow God, that doesn't really change. And so, yes, there are some differences in terms of how we interact with the world, different languages that we speak. Gen Alpha is now talking about skibbity toilet. Yeah, you laughed. Most of us didn't, well, because we have no idea what it means. Sus? Bro? Oh, we're not going to do 6, 7. No, sir. If you haven't walked into a room with young people and tried to count, you haven't experienced fear yet. I'm about to just strike 6 and 7 from my number line. But you get the point, that there's these different challenges in the way that we speak, and the way that we exist, and the way that we do things. And so younger wonder, man, can an older understand? And older wonder, can I understand them? It becomes a challenge. So here's what I'd like to know. How do we overcome them? From a practical perspective, how do we try and address these challenges, these very real challenges, recognizing there is no silver bullet? There's no one thing that's going to work. And whatever works in your congregation might not work in another congregation. So I want to be very clear. There are no silver bullets. And everything we've talked about is something that is deeply ingrained with us as individuals and as societies. There are ways of thinking and perceiving the world. They don't change overnight. They might never change. The way that we view the world might never change. We're not asking people to fully change the way they view the world. We're asking them to overcome those challenges so that transfer of faith can occur. So how do we do that in a practical way, recognizing there's no easy solutions? I'm curious. What do you think? What's the first thing that pops into your head what we might do?
It's not specific, but you would probably just simply have to try to get out of your comfort zone where that I can't really do it, you know, so
okay.
At least try.
But our comfort zone, if we stay in our comfort zone, leaves us where we currently are. The status quo. If anything is to change, it requires individuals to get outside of their comfort zones, which we kind of like our comfort zones because it's comfortable.
Find time to listen.
Okay, find time. And I like you said the idea of listening. We need to try and be able to understand one another. As you mentioned, the idea of we have to love one another, and part of loving one another is being willing to understand one another. And understanding one another can lead to a place where I can love you more because I kind of understand what you're going through and the challenges that are being faced.
Be intentional.
Okay, being intentional. I like you said intentional. That osmosis is we're just going to stand by and we're just going to hope that it happens. Intentional is let's make sure to do something about it. Yes, ma'am.
Making yourself available.
Okay, making yourself available. Somebody said service earlier, and part of service is just I am creating time to make it to where I care enough, to communicate I care enough about you that I will meet your needs.
I'm going to expand on the intentional by your example, I think is a big one.
Okay, intentional, making sure that we're not simply communicating, but that we're living out what we communicate. For young people, I'm quite confident there's no better group in the world than young people who can spot somebody who's saying one thing but doing something else. They just kind of inherently know.
Absolutely.
Which is why they're having trouble with their parents.
Okay.
Because the parents are one person, a church, and a different person at home.
Okay. And so it creates challenges with parents. And so how can we help parents recognize that we're not perfect? We're never going to be perfect. So how are we able to transfer faith? Okay, honesty, be important. Yes?
I'm going to add to the question by not giving a solution.
Excellent.
When the church starts remembering that that's who we are, not what we do, I think this will change, because when fellowship becomes something more than a potluck once a month, where people sit at the tables that they already talked to anyway, you know? Like, because times come up multiple times.
Yeah, we do that.
Okay, so when are you gonna create time? When are you gonna create time to sit and talk with the older, younger generation, wherever you're at on the spectrum? You know, when church is something that you do a couple times a week, well, then there's not time for that. There's not opportunity for that, because we've totally lost sight of what it means to be the church instead of doing church.
Okay. So I heard kind of two things. One, making sure we communicate what are we doing, and two, being intentional with how we go about making the time. You mentioned fellowship. What is fellowship?
Maybe participation.
It is literally participation, which includes getting together. But fellowship is doing all the things that Acts 2 talked about. It is joining together. Perhaps the best way to describe it, it is joining together on a joint business venture, the business of Christianity. That means you join together in the risks, the rewards, the difficulties. It is not merely creating a relationship over a potluck. That would be included within it, but it is certainly not limited to that. Okay, time for one more, and we're going to move on. Yes, sir. I'll let you guys arm wrestle for it. Doesn't matter to me.
I was just going to say that I think it starts with the leaders of congregations need to be very purposed in fostering a culture, creating a culture of intergenerational relationships. We're already purposed in dividing everybody up in their own classes, but balancing that out and being purposed in doing the intergenerational things. And that also goes to the members, older generation, be intentional about making relationships with the younger generation. And the younger generation being intentional about doing that. And then you'll foster a culture that will become organic. It just happen naturally.
I like to talk about intentionality. I like to begin with the idea of leadership. That leadership will be set example. It's one of the ones I'll talk about, and we're going to shift gears in just a second. If we are to change things as leaders, it has to begin with us. How can I expect somebody else to bridge an age gap if I'm not willing to? How can I expect somebody else to bridge an age gap if I'm not doing it? All right, I said one more. Why not? Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think we really need to value them as equals when it comes to service.
Okay.
Like we need to involve them in the work of ministry and value them as you would your preacher, or as you would your Bible school teacher, as you would, those that serve when you have fellowship events. Value them and let them know that they mean so much to the work of the church. Because when you get them serving, they feel a sense of value and that they can offer something, that they're invested, and that you recognize that even though their age, they're young, that doesn't keep them from being an equal when it comes to being a Christian or being involved in the work of the kingdom.
Growing Young talks about key chain leadership, in my opinion, probably the best part of the book. If you can tell somebody who's important because the number of keys they have, it indicates the number of responsibilities, right? Well, young people, the idea is we want to entrust them with responsibilities now. Not later, now. In order that they might build their part. I know you guys have been arm wrestling, go ahead.
But he mentioned intergenerational, but one of the things we talked about earlier about budgeting different line items, we budget intergenerational activities.
We want to be intentional about not only, hey, let's do this, but how can we create a budget where that becomes more feasible? All right, I'll give you some of mine. Again, there's no silver bullets, these are just things I thought about. One is create space for shared experience. Some of you guys have already alluded to this idea. We need to create space for shared experience where we come together. As I think back to the times when I've seen the most intergenerational interactions that seem to matter. It's stuff like mission trips, it's service projects, where you were right beside one another doing something together, but it eliminated some of the awkwardness. All right, I want to talk to you now. Will you please mentor me? It can work, right? But it's a little bit awkward at the same time. But there's something about those shared experiences, for not only was there that opportunity to do so, but now we have something that we both experienced together. And I wonder, how can we create those experiences within our congregation? Some of the things I've seen is maybe instead of just having a bus that takes everybody, maybe you divide up into cars. I remember in Michigan, we didn't have a bus because it's Michigan. You don't drive on the snow and ice with a bus. I did it once and I said never again. It's a very scary thing. Instead, we divided up into little cars. You know what we found? It was kind of interesting that we had these little mini pods with one adult and kids, and they were trapped in the car for hours. So they had to have some of these shared experiences together. It's kind of, I realize it's kind of forced, but they were doing something together, going somewhere together. There's going to be some overlap with this next one. In fact, the first three, there'll be overlap. Oh, Deuteronomy chapter 16. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose. At the feast of the unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, at the feast of booths, they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every male, or every man, shall give as he is able, according to the blessings of the Lord your God that he has given you. What I want to draw your attention to is God, in his law, created 3 times every year where everybody had to get together for the intentional reason of sharing faith, for the intentional reason of faith transfer. 3 times a year. If you want to read through what all those were, what all took place, you can read verses 1 through 16. But he sums everything up with 3 times a year. Everybody's getting together from everywhere. They're all coming together so that we can engage in faith transfer, creating opportunities for shared experiences. Second one, again, there's overlap. Create space for conversation. We don't simply want to be in the same room. We want to try and have conversations. So sometimes, like at things like lock-ins or mission trips, how can we create time not only where we're experiencing something together, but where we're having conversation, because we already talked about this idea of age gap, and generations have a challenge understanding one another. Those who are younger might not understand what it was like to grow up a couple of decades ago. What did the world look like? What are the challenges that you might have experienced? How do you perceive the world now and the challenges that exist there? Those who are older might not fully recognize how young people perceive the challenges that they are facing now, and the challenges and the difficulties that they perceive now. And it's only when those conversations happen that we're able to kind of move through. It's only when the conversations happen that we're able to talk about, here's how I made it through with my faith intact. Well, how do we do that? There's some overlap in that in those moments of shared experience, there might be things for conversation. I remember saying at some mission trips, they'd have this thing called kudos. You might have done it. Basically, it looks like this. At the end of each day, you'd come together and say, all right, who saw someone serving well today? Oh, I saw this person doing so well. Oh, kudos. There was usually some, snapping. Some snapping or something. Just kind of, we all recognize it. That's fantastic. But it was, okay, I was looking to see what you did, and I saw you do blank, creating some opportunities for shared conversation. It might look like at events that you have planned. It might look like asking those who are chaperones, I want you to find one person and invest in them. Because sometimes chaperones show up and, my job is to keep them safe, as opposed to my job is to keep them safe and interact with them. Joshua chapter 4, we won't read the whole text, we're about out of time. Joshua is going to set up a monument with Jordan. Actually, there's 2. One's in the Jordan River, one's outside of the Jordan River. And it's explicitly stated that the reason for this is so that when young people come and ask, what's this pile of rocks for? That there's an opportunity to have a conversation, of creating moments for intentional conversation. Number 3, to encourage mentorship. In Titus chapter 2, which we won't try and read, Titus 2 talks about older teaching younger. And what's interesting is it's not simply teaching about faith. It's let older women teach younger women how to love their husbands and their kids. That is how to live in a family. And there's older men are to teach younger men how to be self-controlled. It's not merely faith, but how do we live out faith? We are not merely the hearers of the word, but doers of the word. And we need to ask, and what I do find interesting about Titus 2 is it's always the older going to the younger and engaging in a mentorship kind of role. We might ask both generations. To begin with, can you just learn one another's names? I wonder how many of our older members of our congregations don't know the younger members' names. And I would bet that there are a bunch of high schoolers, in fact, I know there are a lot of high schoolers who do not know older members' names. So how are we to have conversations, shared experiences, if we don't know each other's name? It's got to be 30 seconds or less.
Well, I was just going to say at last year's event, I forget who it was, and I have to look it up, but he said that when he began work in Oklahoma, said that he went into the elders, gave each one of them a blank sheet of paper, said, write down the names of all the teens that go to church here. And don't put down John's son. Put the names down. And he said, quite a few names, but they didn't appear on that piece of paper, maybe 3 or 4 names each. You can't shepherd a flock if you don't know who the flock is. You can't work with
So perhaps one place we begin in terms of mentorship is just learning one another's names and intentionally going and trying to know who this person is. So that what we want to try and avoid is Sister Susie going up to little Lucy and saying, that's not appropriate. And that being the only interaction they've had. Don't mishear me. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have older looking out for younger. Yes, we should. But if that's the only interaction that happens, what does that communicate? Instead, we want to try and build relationship. We want to try and begin younger. Why? Because faith usually is cemented by about age 11. So we want to try and begin younger as opposed to older. We don't want to spend all of our time with teenagers. Of course we want to spend time with teenagers, but we want to make sure we're investing younger as opposed to older. And then you already said leaders set by example. I want to end with this. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from a bowl. Things that we have heard and known that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell them to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might, and the wonders that he has done. Whose children? We will not hide them from their children. Talk about 3 generations here. The initial generation, their children, and their children's children. When I read this passage, I can't help but think of teaching my son to skip rocks. And if you ever skipped a rock, and you know that it splashes, and then what happens? You get this ripple effect. And that one little moment creates all these ripples that have a much larger impact upon the surface of that water than ever could have been, or ever we could have imagined. And so I wonder what happens as we begin to create more interaction between different generations, trying to intentionally create intentional faith transfer, that the little moments that we do so may have impact not only in the current generation, but even generations beyond. For we want to transfer faith not merely to the next generation, but even the generations after that. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you. God bless.